This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Cort Casady. Cort is a TV writer, producer, songwriter, playwright, and author. He's won 2 Emmy Awards and 3 NAACP Image Awards for his work as a writer, producer, and television. His memoir, Not Your Father's America, An Adventure Raising Triplets in a Country Being Changed by Greed, was just published. And here today to talk about his career and latest book is Cort Casady. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Cort.
Unstorking is good. Thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
I mean, considering the fact that we both have triplets, maybe stork was on my mind. That's
exactly
that Freudian slip. But Cort, I'm curious, where does your story begin?
Well, the story of the book begins in the early 90s. I'm well into my television writing and producing career. In fact, I was doing a daily live television show, primetime show in New York called New York at Night with Clint Holmes. And it was it was like a master's degree in television, given what I'd done. I'd done a lot of live television, I'd done a lot of specials, but to go and do a live show every day in New York is a thing. And at the same time, my wife and I were trying to have a family, trying to start our family. And we'd been trying for a little while before we went to New York to do the series. So those two things were sort of going along side by side, and probably, as you know, in your career, the triplets came along side by side with our careers and trying to make a living and all that at the same time.
So I'm curious, where in your career when you went from a family of 2 to a family of 5, it sounds like you were pretty far down the road in your career, it seems.
Yeah, Barbara and I both. Barbara had just closed a big business doing model homes in California because of the turn down in the real estate market. I was, my career was probably ascending. I mean, it was, or certainly a good, strong mid-career. I'd done a lot of things. I ended up winning my first Emmy for the show we did in New York. So I didn't have an Emmy yet, but and went on to do a lot of other stuff following the New York experience. But I think we both, you may appreciate this, we both felt accomplished in our respective careers. And I had gone from being a writer, an investigative magazine writer, to being a television staff writer, to being a writer-producer. And, we struggled with getting pregnant, and it was sort of like, wow, we thought we were fairly successful people. and it was a little bit of it was confronting that it wasn't all that easy. Yeah.
Well, and it takes a psychological toll on you.
Yes.
Because you start to question, you say things like, people do this so easily. And then you start to think to yourself, we tried to prevent this, from happening, so hard. And then when you try and do it, like, there's parts of you that feel like there's something wrong with me. And it's
yes.
sort of that sort of, thinking kind of creeps in.
Yes, absolutely. That's so true, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, and my wife really felt it, because, in her mind, she was thinking, she's not here to talk about it, so I don't want to talk too much about her. But, there was, a little depression, I would say, that kind of sunk in during that period of time in our life, too, because we were were trying and unsuccessfully trying to start a family.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely right. And I appreciate that you really understand this. We tried most of our young adult lives to not get pregnant, and so you assume, well, if we stop using birth control, boom, it'll happen. And of course, it didn't. And as you say, it's depressing, it's confronting, and I think for my wife especially, she said to me at one point, she said, I've run a business, I've got a career, I've succeeded in so many ways, and why can't we succeed at this? It was very difficult.
Yeah. I do want to transition to after your triplets were born. I mean, I had this experience where people would see me pushing a triplet stroller all over our neighborhood. I was all of 27 years old at the time. And what I would do on the weekends, because there wasn't much to do with 3 little babies at home, we couldn't go anywhere. They were 9 weeks premature. So, we couldn't really leave the house that much. So it was really, we had to kind of have our own little adventures, and I would just walk all over the neighborhood, and people would literally pull me over as I was walking, and they'd ask me, are they triplets? And I said, yes. And then sometimes I'd be like, no, I just like babies. I'm just
yeah, just love pushing kids around.
I just love pushing them uphill.
That's funny.
Then they'd say, well, is it hard having triplets? And I'd be like, this is when you realize that there is such thing as a stupid question.
Yes.
Because I would be like, oh, yeah, it's hard having triplets. I went from having 0 babies to 3 babies in the span of 3 minutes, not knowing what was ahead of me. But
that's so true.
But did you have those experiences?
We had a single stroller and a double, because none of us wanted to go out with all 3. We just couldn't picture it. So 2 people always went out, and we'd have the 2 and the 1. And they obviously looked the same age, and they're not identical, but they're clearly fraternal. And we'd, be going up the hill. We had a hill behind our house, and we'd be pushing them along, and we'd get somewhere, and somebody would come up and say, oh, look, are they twins? And we'd say, count again, give it another shot, right? And then later, I don't know if you had this, but people, when they meet 3, I don't know if it's maybe because of 3, maybe it happens with twins, they'd say, well, which one is the smartest? Or which one's the best athlete, stuff like that. Right. And my wife, and she, to the question, which one is the smartest, she would always say, not you, apparently, because, we didn't want to go there. There was plenty of competition amongst the 3 in utero, right? From the moment of life itself. We didn't need to add to that. And we tried not to. I talk about this in the book, something I call unique equals. And are yours boys, girls, mixed?
2 girls and 1 boy.
2 girls and 1 boy. Well, there you go.
Yeah. How about yours?
Pardon me?
How about yours?
3 boys.
Okay.
And so the concept of unique equals, I'm one of 5. I'm the youngest of 5 boys. And as the youngest of 5, or anywhere in a normal birth order, first of all, you're somewhere in the birth order. And then, so you're not really equal. You may be unique, right? In my family, I was unique because, amongst other things, I was the baby in the family. But I'm not equal by any means, right? I'm the low man on the totem pole.
Yeah.
With the triplets, what I found fascinating was if you didn't intrude on the reality of it for them, if you didn't, insert something artificial, their view was they all stood on the same ground. So if he could do it, I could do it. Now, very unique individuals, as it has turned out to be very clear, and we always saw them as unique. But if you didn't create one as the smartest, or one as the one that plays baseball, or the this or that, they saw life as if he can do it, I can do it. And it's a fascinating dynamic if you just let it be,
Yeah.
I suspect that's true even though girls and boys are different, obviously, but I suspect there's some truth in that for your triplets.
Oh, absolutely. We tried very hard not to refer to them as the triplets.
Right.
Because me, I'm actually a twin myself. And
Oh,
I
are you?
remember, I am, yeah. I remember growing up with my twin brother. It was always Michael and Jimmy, Michael and Jimmy, Michael and Jimmy. Never us individually. So I always had it in my head that, I want them to be individuals and not, So if somebody would say, "What are the triplets up to?" I'd be like, I'd try to just gently correct them a little bit.
Yes. Yes.
But we did see in terms of like development and first steps and first words, they all followed the same pattern. It was really interesting. Like Maggie was the first to do everything. Patrick would follow on her heels, and then it was Grace. And it always followed, whether it's talking, whether it was walking or pulling themselves up. I've got this great picture. They're all around this round table at my parents' condo in Florida, and they're just pulling themselves up to stand. And then, a month later, they're walking. But it was Maggie took the first steps first. Patrick saw it, tried, and then he would tear across the room. And then Grace always, she always took her time. She was like, you know what? I'm gonna hold off on this. Walking, I like being carried.
Yeah.
It's just so fun.
Right, but there was that's a great example. And there's in that moment, there's no. They may have their own pace and their own choice about what they do and when they do it, but there's no doubt, I think, when with triplets, there's no doubt they can do it. She waited. Braden, our son Braden, was a little cautious like that, but he wasn't worried about being able to do what his brothers just did.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's a fun thing.
So, what prompted you to write a book about this? I mean, I know your background was in writing, but what got you thinking to write a book about this?
Well, I don't know if you've had this, but early on, people would say, "Oh, you should write a book about triplets," and I thought, really? I mean, how many dozen people are going to be interested in that? And who had time? I mean, we were slammed with the three babies coming home all at once, and just the no learning curve. Let's go, here we go, and trying to figure it all out, and work at the same time. Both of us still very, very active in our careers, so there was no. I made notes because I'm a writer and I'm a note taker, and I would. Have the occasional journal entry, and Barbara, in the second year after we started to recover a little bit, Barbara kept some journal notes for about 9 months, and I found a file that was called monologue notes, and it was jokes basically, and I thought. When I looked back, I thought, what was I thinking? I was going to do, a stand-up, a TED Talk on triplets. I don't know. But that's kind of my way. I keep things. So we got together. We had moved, and some files appeared, and we started looking at it. And we got the boys together, and we sort of read through some of they were, little snippets of experiences, and we were just laughing, and they were laughing, and we thought. I came away from that. They were now off to college. We had the freedom, lots more freedom. And I thought, well, this could be a book. And what I wanted to do was share the experience we had, that Barbara and I had, and this, with our sons, first of all, because they didn't know a lot of what we had gone through. And they didn't remember most of what we had gone through in the early stages. I mean, kids, you start talking about when they were 3 or 4 or 2, or they don't remember for the most part. They don't remember specifics particularly. So that's what I thought. Well, I want to share this, and then I realized, well, there's a book here, and it could be revealing and something where I share not only with my family but with others. And then this added piece of my book is a kind of father's observations of what's going on in the world we're leaving to the triplets. And I'm an activist, and I come out of a newspaper family, so I'm sort of wired to be in tune, to be try to be informed. And I thought, well, we're driving down the road, raising up these kids, and there's a lot of stuff happening, as we go. That again, I wanted to share not only with the reader but with my sons. Like you might want to know that in addition to before there were cell phones, or in addition to before Google, there was this stuff happening. To give them more context, I think. So I think the reader gets a kind of a double history, or whatever you want to call it, double observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some war stories.
Okay, great.
I remember, and I'm curious if this was your experience as well. I remember when the kids were born, I was 27. If I was mid-management at my job, I'm probably giving myself a promotion. I was still pretty young in my career.
Yeah.
And I was not sleeping at all because my wife had a C-section, as most people who have multiple, certainly triplets, it's
exactly
safer way to go. So she was still recovering, so I was doing all of the nighttime feedings, which were important because our kids came home all under 5 pounds. They were in the NICU for a month
until they got to 4 pounds.
Yeah, but basically what we found out after the fact was our insurance company was pushing the hospital to discharge them.
Yes.
Which we could probably, I could do a podcast series on my feelings towards insurance companies.
Yes.
But I wasn't sleeping at all because my wife, she was still recovering, so we had to feed the children, the kids, the babies, every 3 hours. So, 9 p.m., 12 a.m., 3 a.m., and after you finish the third, it's almost time to start the first again.
That's right. Yeah, because you're feeding and burping and changing.
Yeah.
Times 3.
So I was walking into my office. I was working. I probably shouldn't say the name of the company. Big financial services institution. And I remember one day my boss pulled me aside. She was not a mother, didn't have kids, and she said, "Hey, I'm worried about you." And I said, "Oh, thank you. Like, things have been really hard with the kids. I'm not sleeping at all. I'm averaging maybe an hour a night." She's like, "Oh, no, your performance is slipping. We might have to put you on some kind of a improvement plan." And I had always been a high performer. And I'm like, "Excuse me?" I'm like, "Excuse me?" She's like, "Yes. We noticed that you're tired a lot. You're not really participating." And I'm like, I can only tell you that I'm not sleeping at all because of this huge transition that I just went through. She's like, "Well, I needed to talk to you about this, blah, blah, blah." So that prompted me and my wife to hire a night nurse.
Yes.
Now, the night nurse was a woman we had met. She was one of the nurses in the NICU, and she told us, this woman was so lovely. She said, "Hey, look, me and some of the girls, we, on our nights off, we still stay up because we have to have this nocturnal schedule. So, if you want, we'd be happy to come to your house." So we called them one night, and it was all the money in the world to me, $30 an hour, and they worked 12-hour shifts. So we called them, and so Rita came over, and she said, "Okay, it's 7 p.m. You and your wife are going to bed. I don't want to see you till 7 a.m. We got our first good night of sleep in months, and I was hooked. At one point in time, we hired them 6 days during the week.
Wow.
But just to get a good night's sleep until we got them on a schedule.
Yes.
A sleeping schedule, which was a story in and of itself. But what's your take on sleeping schedules?
Well, it's so great what you're saying, because that's almost precisely what our experience was. When we left, when one of the boys went straight to the normal nursery, One of them, the other two went to NICU, one for a week, the other for a couple weeks. And then when they finally all came home, Barbara was at home recovering from a C-section, as you said. I had hired a nanny to live in to help us. But and so when I was picking up the last of our sons, the nurse at the hospital said, "Mr. Casady, the triplets are on a schedule. You need to keep them on a schedule." And I said, "Oh, yeah, thanks. Good to know." And she grabbed me by the shoulders and she said, "No, listen to me. You need to do this. If you don't keep them on a schedule, you're going down, okay? They will take you out." I went, okay. So we had a major schedule. But as you point out, in the early going, it was just Barbara and me. And then because we burned out our nanny in 3 weeks, she just literally disappeared. It was like we took her to the bottom of the hill one morning, and she said, "Goodbye, Mrs. Don't work too hard," and we never saw her again. Right?
That's the exact beginning of Mary Poppins.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, boy, if only we'd had Mary. But then. So then we had no one for weeks on end. And it was exactly as you said. I mean, in our case, it was 4 hours. So 8 and then midnight and then 4 in the morning. And we were doing it together, and Barbara was nursing and she was amazing. But we were so tired because, as you point out, there's not that much time once you finish the midnight feeding. Pretty soon you're up at 4 doing the next one. So we weren't getting any sleep. We weren't getting the 5 hours you need to be sane.
Yeah.
We were so tired. We were telling government secrets we didn't even know. We were like tortured people, and it was brutal. And then we finally got a night nurse who came. I think we paid her $100 for the night. And happy to do it because we could sleep through the night. So in the middle of, maybe 3 in the morning, I wake up to a popping sound. And I go to the window of our bedroom and I look out, and there's a glow up on the hill behind our house. And I go, what's that? And I go to the front of the house and look out onto the street, and there are fire trucks on the street for as far as you can see, down the hill, up the hill, lights flashing. And I thought, oh my God, there's a fire, right? So I go back to the bed and I wake Barbara and I say, "Barbara, I think the house behind us is on fire." And she said, "Is our house on fire?" And I said, "No, but I think the one right behind." And she said, "Wake me up if our house is on fire." And she went right back to sleep. I mean, we were paying for shut-eye, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, brutal. And that's partly in the book, too. We would sit in the nursery at 4 in the morning, and it was like we had some experiences. We had traveled and done some things. And so we'd sit there and we'd look at each other through bleary eyes, and she'd say, "Remember France?" I'd go, "Yeah." And we'd sort of go back there. And then at one point I was thinking about my father, and I thought about his campaign for mayor. There's actually a bit of that in the book as well. So it was like that. I mean, it was survival, wasn't it? I mean, you just had to survive.
You had to have a sense of humor.
Yes.
And that's the one thing my wife and I talk about is
Yes.
that because if we didn't have a sense of humor, like you were doomed. You were doomed. I remember one night, in the middle of the night, I'm changing one of the kids. They're squirming. I can't get them to be still. My wife meanders in, and I just look at her and I say, "I don't know what the F I'm doing here."
Exactly.
I'd probably changed 1,000 diapers up until that
Oh,
point
yeah.
in time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just don't know what the F I'm doing here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was an Olympic grandmaster diaper changer. I mean, we at the end we did a diaper service because we didn't want a landfill named after us.
Yeah.
So they gave us a count after we stopped the service, and we did 35,000 diapers in the whatever it was, three and a half years. It was just insane, you know.
You're a better man than I. I bought stock in Pampers.
That's been smart. Yeah.
Did you? I promise I'll get to serious questions, but I'm just fascinated by this. I don't find too many brothers in arms.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. I appreciate it too.
Did you and Barbara ever have phantom baby syndrome, where you're lying in bed and you just imagine that you're lying on one of the kids who is not there? Did that ever happen to you guys?
We didn't. No, that's scary to me.
Very scary.
Yeah, they came home to 3 cribs. We did have 3 cribs, and we learned. We had a baby nurse in the beginning because we knew nothing. We didn't know how to feed him. We didn't know how to diaper him. We really didn't know anything. But we had 3 of them and 3 cribs, so we were trained over probably a week with. And she was there at night, but she was really the kind of safety net, right? That we wouldn't mess up something along the way. And so we were trained and learned to, you know, not only change them and do all that, but to kind of swaddle them and park them on an angle and, you know, all the stuff. And so they, to the extent they slept, which was, you know, every 4 hours, they went off like an alarm clock. The schedule thing that the hospital suggested was diabolical. I mean, they literally at 12 o'clock noon, they'd go off. And then at, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd go off. All 3, like a smoke alarm, right? And one day we had people over, and at noon, we were chatting in the dining room, and all of a sudden up in the nursery, the alarm goes off, right? And we realize, oh my gosh, it's noon. Barbara runs upstairs, and I go in the kitchen to make a couple of bottles, 3 bottles, because we were mixing. She was nursing and formula, and by the time I'm on the stairs going up with the bottles, it's quiet in the nursery, and I thought, wow, how's that possible? And I walk in, she's got a boy on each breast. And her knuckle in the mouth, excuse me, her knuckle's in the mouth of the 3rd boy. And like your point, I walked in and went, okay, I can't do that. I've got nothing in this deal right here. I just set the bottles down and left. Yeah. So humbling.
Did you ever because we had baby monitors, so we could hear them when they would wake up in the morning, and this is kind of getting past the time where we had to feed them every few hours. It was, they were all at kind of weight and sleeping almost through the night. Did you ever just lie or wait in bed in the morning and just listen to them talk to each other?
Yeah, well, I messed this up. Dad error, new dad error. I set up the monitor, and after 2 nights, I said to Barbara, why do they need to hear what we're doing? And I realized I had set it up the wrong way. Okay, so we got that straight. But yes, and we used to come in the morning, and they would be up on their feet, the 3 cribs, and kind of like chatting, like before they could really talk, they were chatting like neighbors over a fence to each other. It was fascinating.
It was great. Yeah. They would have full-on conversations, inflection and tone, giggle. Like they knew what they were saying to each other.
They did. I think they did. Yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah. And then we got to the point where we'd hear a thump, and then we'd get into the room, and then all 3 would be in one crib.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So they
when they started when they could, especially the boys, when they can escape from the crib, it's very scary to me.
Yeah.
And we had read about a kid that, I think it was in the Midwest somewhere, and it was winter, and the kid got out of his crib and got to the door and got outside, and it was bad, So there's so much paranoia around being a parent, not to mention a parent of one has paranoia and worry and concern. It just comes with the territory and apparently never ends. but to have three, it's times three.
Yeah.
So many cases I would kind of monitor them, and you get sort of a sixth sense of what they're doing. And with three boys, they were puppies in a pile a lot of the time, or up to something. They were really mischievous, but in a very innocent way. But it was like, you got to keep an eye on them because I don't want to go to the ER, right?
Right.
Which, happened once at least. But
Yeah, absolutely. When our kid, we were having a hard time, like once they hit like a year old, we were having a very hard time getting them down to bed at night. So I would get in the door, we would feed them dinner, and then we would wait for them to fall asleep in like their chair or something. And at times, they would only go to bed at like 9 o'clock. And then they wouldn't all fall asleep at the same time. And it was very frustrating. And we talked to our pediatrician about it. And our pediatrician says, oh, no, you're doing it all wrong. 7 o'clock, you put them in their cribs, let them scream their heads off if they want to, and you do not go in there until it's quiet. And I said, that will never effing work. I was just getting mad. I'm like, you don't know what it's like to have triplets.
yeah,
That'll never effing work. And my wife is like, why do you have to be such a jerk all the time? Just try it. And the pediatrician's like, hey, look, try it for 3 nights. If I'm wrong, you can come back next week and tell me I'm wrong. Well, first night, kids are screaming their head off. Second night, it's a little bit better, but they're still screaming. Third night, we put them in, and they just go right to bed.
wow.
And then I'm like, okay, well, something's wrong. Like, they're dead. There's a gas leak. And there's some kind of problem in there.
Yeah.
Sure enough, I
Carbon
walk in.
monoxide poisoning or something.
Yeah, I walk in and they're fast asleep, and I'm like, holy. Then I started to realize that I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And there was something to the Ferber method, but that was another sort of milestone that changed our life. Was getting them on a sleep schedule.
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
big
It was
time.
great.
We did the Ferber method very much as you're describing it. We had more of a routine at bedtime. It was we'd eat, they'd have their dinner, they'd get to play for a little while, and then they had a bath, and then into their cribs for a reading a story. One in rotation. We did this thing called choice person. And one would sit on mom or dad's lap for the reading, and the others would listen. Then we'd play music, and they'd go right to sleep. But it was I mean, when 7 o'clock came, it was like, here we go, we're on the trail. And by 8 o'clock, they were asleep. I mean, we couldn't. I don't think we could have survived, but they didn't always sleep through the night. To your point, so we had to do the Ferber method, and it's very much like what your pediatrician said, except you let them cry, and then you go in and check them to make sure they haven't come uncovered or aren't snaggled, and you make sure they're safe. You rub their back or whatever, and then you leave them. And if they cry, you leave them for 5 or 10 minutes more, and then you go back. Just make sure they're okay. So we did that on night one, and first of all, we're thinking, as I'm sure you did, like, Ferber, does this work with triplets? He doesn't talk about triplets. He talks about one baby, So because one would wake up, and that would wake up the other one, and then pretty soon all three. Again, it's the smoke alarm deal, right? So we just tried it. We said, all right, we'll try it. And it did take 3 nights of going in, making sure they were okay, letting them cry. But finally, it worked. And it was like getting a raise. I mean, it was a huge advance in the whole deal, for sure.
So when you sort of went, into your Wayback Machine, as you started, putting this book together.
Yeah.
Did you? I mean, I guess I'm just curious as to what emotions were you experiencing when you were kind of putting it all together in the manuscript? Were you?
Yeah.
Did you have any post-traumatic stress or anything like that?
A little. Mostly it was gratitude, I have to say. It was so challenging to start our family. And then so incredibly, we lost a baby girl born too soon in the run-up to having the triplets. And when Barb got pregnant with the triplets, we thought, oh my God, what if we have another horrible disaster, but this time with 3 babies. And then we had a couple people say, well, you can reduce the pregnancy.
Yeah.
And that part of the book for me was the most excruciating because it brought back that incredible, it was just painful. We were, she was being driven by hormones times 3, as any mother would be who's pregnant. And I was being driven by fear times 3. How would we, I'm sorry, excuse me. How would we get through this? How are we going to afford this? And then, really, are we going to somehow reduce this pregnancy, from 3 to 2? And we were on that precipice for weeks, it felt like. And then we thankfully some friends sort of gave us some guidance, and this is in the book, and we decided, all right, we're going to take responsibility for having 3. We're taking responsibility for everything that comes with it. And that was a really emotional, for me, part of the book to relive that. And then, having gotten through that, the gratitude that I feel every day still for how it all turned out.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary. And so yeah, the other, many of the other parts were fun to relive. There's a part of the book where the boys had a terrible baseball coach, and that was hard. That was hard to relive. It was really destructive in our family and other families at the high school. And I wanted to write more about it, but I decided I shouldn't and wouldn't. But it's there, and that was very uncomfortable to revisit. But a lot of it was being grateful.
So there is a subtitle to the book, Adventure Raising Triplets in a Country Being Changed by Greed. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that part of it. I know you alluded to it before, earlier in our conversation, but why is it important for you to kind of put current events into the book?
Right. So what I wanted to do was, since we were taking responsibility for all of it, for the triplet pregnancy, for how it might turn out, we also felt, and I particularly felt, responsible for making the reader and making our sons aware of the America they were inheriting, an America very different from my father's America. An America very different from the America that my brothers and I came up in, because until the 90s, we would not have had children, but for in vitro, fertility medicine. So that's a big difference. We wouldn't have a family today if it hadn't been for that. And then the America they were going to inherit was going to be different yet again for various reasons. So I was noticing that. I mean, we'd get them to bed, it'd be 8:30, we're exhausted, I'd sit down and watch the news maybe, or I would read the paper, catch up on trying to stay conversant with life outside of our house, and I saw these things happening that were interesting to me, but also I felt were game changing. and so I wanted to notice them. Now, all the things I talk about, for the most part, occur in this window from the early 90s when we have our family to 2013 or whatever it is, when they go off to college. So I'm not writing a historical piece. I'm not going outside of the boundaries, although at one point I did overshoot the runway. I did in writing, and my editor said, you need to pull this back. But, I got into Trump land, I think, at one point, and it was like, no. But so it's a commentary inside that window in which the book is taking place. And I wanted to, point, it was for me as well. I wanted to point at it and notice. So one of the probably the biggest underlying note is that since the 80s, since Reagan, frankly, the country has been deregulated in many, many ways across many, many industries. And some folks, of course, say, well, deregulation is good for the job creators, and I understand that. But it's actually not. It turns out, if you look at the history, regulation, smart, well-enforced, intelligent regulation saves lives, saves businesses, saves fortunes, it saves people from missing work. And there's case after case that demonstrate that, and yet we've gone off on this. And again, my father's America was, more or less unregulated. The America my brothers came up in, and the early part of the early part our kids were coming up in, was regulated. I talk about going into Toys R Us, and there's warnings on toys. Useful warnings. Good to know. This is a choking hazard for a child under 3. Well, thanks, because I might have bought that not knowing. Seat belts, on and on. Food inspection. Regulations have been very good for America. And then what I noticed is they were being pulled out of the financial system, or pulled out of the fundraising, money in politics system, or pulled out of, if you look at the Deep Horizon spill in the Gulf, which was devastating, you don't get that without deregulation. If you look at Enron, the largest bankruptcy still, I think, in American history, when 28,000 people, something like that, lost their jobs overnight. That doesn't happen if you have intelligent regulation. So I just thought it was worth pointing a finger at. I think I've avoided it being a screed or a rant. And most folks, now that folks are reading the book, I'm finding folks are interested in it. Some people are skipping over those parts, I suspect. Let's get to the next baby section, which is fine. But other folks have said to me they've sort of enjoyed it because they're going along in this adventure, and then there's a little bit of a departure, but the departures come up in the timeline. I always think of 2000. The boys were 5. And we put them to bed, and we're watching, I just remember Brian Williams on NBC, I guess. And they're reporting on the fact that the Supreme Court is giving the election to George W. Bush, even though he lost the election by 500,000 votes to Al Gore. And Barbara says, oh my goodness, this is the beginning of the end. And I thought, well, that's a little dramatic, isn't it, Mom? And then, in retrospect, that was a watershed moment, and worth remembering. Again, do millennials know about that, care about that, think about that? I don't know, but I thought that's worth pointing at. As we move along. Now that's not exactly deregulation in that case, but We're coming home from baseball one afternoon, and this community of San Bruno, California, explodes. People are killed, and dozens of homes are destroyed from a gas leak in San Bruno, California. I mean, it's just like, just on an ordinary afternoon after school for us. And when you look, it's because there was no regulation of the gas company. They weren't required to maintain the pipes. And it's costly to maintain the pipes. So let's not do it, right? And then the neighborhood explodes. So I just thought those were part of the context in which the triplets are, that story is occurring. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Makes total sense. There's contextualizes.
Yes.
It helps to contextualize the experience. That's for certain.
That's right.
Have the boys read the book, and what have they shared with you about it if they have?
They've read the book, and well, I have to say my son Jackson is actually still reading the book. They've had it for a while. They've all said that they really feel like it's a story worth chronicling, and I think they knew pretty much what was going into it, and so I don't think they've been shocked by anything that they've read. They've been very, very positive, very complimentary, actually. And I my publicist got me on the cover of a thing called Writer's Life magazine. And they saw that and they went, "Wow, okay." So I don't know. It took a visual for them to appreciate what Dad was doing, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I see the Emmy Awards behind you. I think those are Emmy Awards, right?
they are. Yeah, there's two of them there.
Yeah. Well, so the first one you mentioned was the one you won for
New York at Night.
The New York at Night. What was the other one for?
So the other one was for the American Film Institute tribute to Mel Brooks. And I've been doing the AFI tribute since 2003. The first one I did was Robert De Niro. The second one was Meryl Streep. It's been like that. I mean, really amazing. Each one is different, of course, because the careers are very different. But it's a live event. It's a biographical or filmography of the honoree. Really fun. And the morning after we won the Emmy for Mel Brooks, we called him, and the first thing he said was, "You're welcome." It's like, okay.
I have such an appreciation for him and his work.
Oh, he's amazing.
But I remember as a young kid, I saw this movie when I was way too young, but History of the World Part 1.
Yes.
This is what happens when, a child of the 80s left home alone quite a bit. We have cable TV, and all of a sudden we're seeing History of the World Part 1. I mean, to this day, one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Not sure that they could make it again. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I know that they are working on a series, History of the World Part 2. I think
Oh,
it's
wow.
a 6 or 8 part series on Hulu or something.
Yeah.
But,
He's an amazing individual. I discovered something about him that I didn't know when we were doing that show, is that he's very musical, and he's very well informed about music, and I think he's been composing. In other words, and he's a musician and knows a lot about music, and I always think of him in terms of comedy. But I got to discover this sort of musical side to Mel Brooks, which is great.
Yeah, and you clearly share that in common.
Yes, absolutely.
Your own musical background.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I know we are running out of time here, Cort. I always like to end with a little retrospective question, which is if you could go back in time and whisper some words of advice into your younger self. Now, that could be, you as you're growing up, or it could be you as an expectant father of 3. What would you tell your younger self? What kind of words of advice would you share the younger Cort?
Wow, that's a great question. I would tell myself, hang in there. Don't give up. And at the same time, trust, trust that it'll be okay. My wife and I think of that, and we thought of it with the triplets in respect to, we were committed to having our family and not attached. If you can be committed and not attached to the outcome, it can be very powerful. So that's a kind of a, feels like maybe a dangerous space, but it really isn't. I would whisper to myself, hang in there.
Hang in there.
Hang in there in the middle of the night at 4 a.m.
That's right.
Right.
With the screaming kids in here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many times, right? Like you said, what am I doing here? You're overwhelmed at times, and all you can do is hang in, right?
Right. Well, now it's like things have come full circle because, the kids are in college now, but when they come home, I can't get them to bed at 9 o'clock. They go to bed at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
The only difference is now they sleep until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah. So they do sleep.
Right.
That's funny.
But I still have to feed them. So.
Yeah. I know.
There's that. Well, this has been a fun conversation. Of
really
course, the
fun.
book is Not Your Father's America and Adventure Raising Triplets in a Country Being Changed by Greed. Cort, where can people buy this book of yours?
They can buy this book at Amazon.com. They can buy it at Barnes & Noble. You can buy it and order it up at your local bookstore. I had a friend who ordered it the other day, and he got it from Amazon in one day, which I find is amazing. It's in all the places you would expect to be. You can order it. In other words, it's probably, if you go into your Barnes and Noble store, it's probably not sitting on the front shelf next to what's his name's book, that guy Spare. It's probably not next to Spare. But if you go to the cashier and ask for it, they'll order it for you.
They'll get it for you. That must be a true friend who bought your book instead of asking you to give him one.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, and then if they buy it and read it, that's really a compliment.
Oof. Buy it, read it, and review it.
That helps too. Yeah, I've got some 5-star reviews on Amazon, so that's good. The reviews are coming in.
Yeah, very good. Well, Cort, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mike. A really fun interview. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.